Shall we begin with the proclamation?
Yes, please.
Pursuant, this is the March 23, 2021 meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general laws, chapter 30A, section 18, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Select Board is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to assure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that the persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. All votes subject to remote participation, and therefore will be roll call votes. And participating remotely are Selectmen Michael Marcucci and Gus Murby and Osler Peterson. Welcome, everyone. So we start our meetings with a moment of silence and appreciation for our troops serving around the world. So why don't we do that first? Thank you. And I think we did remind everybody that we're being recorded. And I just wanted to share something that we received this week. It was from a citizen who was writing his appreciation basically for the service that he got from the ambulance service in town. And let me just read from his email. I would like to commend members of the fire department who came to my home on Friday, March 19, to carry my wife to our car and back into our home. The firefighters carried her down the stairs from the second floor bedroom and up the stairs after I took her for possible treatment at Beth Israel Deaconess. They were kind and gentle, and this was not an easy task, and they demonstrated a professionalism throughout this assistance. As a resident of this town for over 20 years, I'm proud that we have fine professionals working to assist our residents. I want to say thank you for the assistance and hope that these fine public servants get a attaboy from their leaders. So Medfield Fire Department EMTs, attaboy. Very much appreciate your comments, sir. Thank you so much for sending those in. I'm sure that the firefighters at the fire department appreciate those too. So our first issue is police chief to recommend that the Board of Selectmen vote to appoint Connor Ash. Were you saying that you wanted to hold this or just vote on it? We don't need.
No, let's hold it.
Okay.
The police chief and Connor are going to be here around 7:30, so they know that they have to wait depending on where we are in our discussion.
Okay. Second item is Todd Treyabenko, Medfield State Hospital Development Committee Chair, to discuss the request for proposals for the Medfield State Hospital. Request Board of Selectmen vote to release the request for proposals. Oh, you're starting to appear, Todd. Thank you for coming. Thanks for all your work on the state hospital.
You're welcome. You can hear my voice, right? But you can't see me.
We can, exactly. We see your name.
Okay. How's that? That's better, right?
Well, we see you now.
Okay.
And I think that's better, Pete. This question was, is that better?
Absolutely,
yes. So thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the draft RFP for the Medfield State Hospital. The version that you received last week, which was version 3, represents the best work of the State Hospital Development Committee, as well as our consultant Peregrine Urban Initiative. And we've had some really strong support from both Nick Milana and Sarah Raposa at the town. So it's been an interesting 6 months or so since we started on the RFP journey. A lot of meetings, several rounds of public comment, a lot of trips to Starbucks for emergency coffee, and even a couple of visits to CVS for more printer paper. if you can believe it. But the primary updates from version 2 that you received last month, in this version now, we've incorporated or attempted to incorporate your comments from the February meeting. We've also incorporated discussions from the development committee about revised scoring, which that discussion was really a direct result of the discussion at the selectmen's meeting the previous evening. We've adopted suggested language from the Medfield Energy Committee, as well as an appendix document drafted by MEC, both after some back and forth with the development committee. We've confirmed that the draft RFP is acceptable with no changes from the Massachusetts Historical Commission, as required under the 2014 Memorandum of Agreement. We've re-reviewed and more carefully integrated the comments we received in January from the Medfield Historic District Commission. We attended the Medfield Historical Commission meeting in late February, discussed the RFP with them to get their feedback. We considered public comments we received on version 2, and then there was also a fair amount of editing of the document just for clarity and consistency. So, I'm pleased to take any questions you may have or to discuss particular points in version 3 that you received for review late last week.
So Todd, let me just ask, is it easier to build private developments as you do in your business or municipal developments, do you think?
Private? Is that a trick question?
Yeah, I just assume it's easier to do private work than municipal work. Gus, did you want to start, or you're on the development committee, so you may not have so many issues.
I certainly don't have issues. I think they've done a wonderful job.
Mike, did you have issues, comments?
Well, I'm going to say what will be music to Todd's ears. I have no further comments or questions. In reviewing this, I think it's certainly the case for everybody who's contributed to this, that if any one of us was the sole author of it, it would probably read somewhat differently than it does. And that's the nature of a document like this that's drafted by a committee for approval by a board of 3 people. But I think the committee did a really excellent job with this in trying to navigate between comments, questions, and perspectives that were in some case sometimes contradictory or at least in some tension with each other. I think the final product is really good, and I think it's time to release it. So I have nothing further to add to this.
Thank you.
I too am happy with the draft and look forward to the responses that you're going to get to it.
Terrific.
So do we have any questions or comments from the public?
Oh, I see a hand up, Pete.
I don't know this Bill Massaro fellow. Do you? Hold on.
Make sure you verify his email address.
Hi, Bill.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to thank Todd and the committee for doing a very nice job. I apologize for the pages and pages that I sent. But again, as I had told Todd in a couple of emails, my goal was to just get the best RFP that we could, to get it out there, to make sure that the developers understood in advance what some of the unique properties about the property were. I'm pretty much satisfied with that. Todd we got basically one thing left to look at, and that's the number of square feet. And I'm willing to help interpret the tables if anybody has any questions to get that number right. You don't want to overstate the existing numbers, because it conceivably could drive up some of the remediation costs in the buildings and what have you. So again, thank you for your work.
Well, thank you, Bill. Just with respect to the square footage, we're just trying to get a good read on what's currently there. And I think some of the estimates in the past included some buildings that maybe are now no longer there, or maybe some anticipated construction under the master plan. So it's presented as factual. We want it to be as accurate as possible, but we're not asking anyone to, bid by square foot or anything like that. So hopefully we'll get a good number that'll be a good reference point and helpful.
All right, like I said, if anybody has any questions, I mean, we can talk about, I can go through in detail, where the numbers come from or anything else. So just, take advantage of my willingness to help, if you would. Thank
Bill,
you.
thank you. Bill, thank you for your careful reading and input on it. It was your depth of knowledge of the Medfield State Hospital issues is very helpful to the town.
Thank you.
Bill?
Anybody else seem to have an interest in commenting, Chris?
I don't have any other comments in the Q&A.
So do we have a motion then to
Yes,
release
I
the
would.
request for
Yep,
proposals?
I would move that we authorize the release of the requests for proposals for the redevelopment of the former Medfield State Hospital as presented by the committee, subject to the factual clarification as to the number of extant square feet. The resolution of any questions on that subject we will leave to the discretion of the chairman of the Medfield State Hospital Development Committee in consultation with helpful citizens and town employees alike.
Second.
Mr. Peterson?
Yep.
Mr. Murby?
Aye.
And Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Thank you so much. Good luck.
Excellent.
Thanks, Todd.
Before I drop, there is a marketing plan that was circulated in December and approved by the state with no comments. So just a clarifying question, does the motion that just passed, just want to confirm that that includes release of the RFP and the associated marketing plan?
I'm not remembering the marketing plan off the top of my head, but I assume that the
It's basically a list. There's some factual information from the RFP, which we'll update, obviously, to reflect the version that was just reviewed. And then there's a distribution list. The state said beyond that, we could add anyone we like, but they were satisfied with the groups and qualifications of the organizations that were listed on there for outreach.
Yep. I think the fact that I don't remember it that well is probably a good sign, because if I hadn't liked it, I would remember it, certainly. So,
Hey, Todd, just one question of clarification. That marketing plan has a list of who we're planning to send that to, but in no way would limit us from adding names to that list. So it's not if anything, it would be a more we would add names to the list, and it's already a pretty good sized list. It's not an issue of.
That's correct.
I mean, if we need a formal motion, I'll move that we also authorize the distribution of the request for proposals according to the marketing plan as presented to us and to the state as updated with any additional recipients in the discretion of the development committee.
Second.
Mr. Peterson?
Yep.
Mr. Murby?
Aye.
And Mr. Marcucci, aye.
thanks again, Todd.
Excellent.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you all so much. Look forward to the next stage here.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good evening.
Take care. Bye now. Our next appointment is with the Medfield Affordable Housing Trust to discuss Hinkley South requests for proposals and recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, potential vote of award by the Board of Selectmen. I'm an abutter to this parcel, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Is there anybody else from the Affordable Housing Trust that you need me to bring over?
I don't know if Sarah was, I don't see anybody else on there. I don't know if Sarah was presenting anything or if we can just launch right into another episode of Mike and Gus talk about building stuff near Pete's house.
I think everybody's waiting to hear that.
You want me
So
to
Gus,
start?
do you want to start? I mean, I
Yeah.
already sat through a 3-hour
So-
affordable housing trust meeting on this. And so,
So unfortunately, no things go just swimmingly smoothly without any question. But before I even start, what I did was I looked at all 4 of the proposals, and I didn't have the benefit of any specific detailed assessment of the Affordable Housing Trust. I just said, well, I'm going to look at the 4 proposals. I'll see what I think, and I will kind of lay out my thoughts. I'll have my own reaction, and then I'll compare it to the recommendation. So what you're hearing here from me is not pushback. It's contradictory views, but it's only because I'm trying to understand. It's not like I have a firm position that I'm arguing for. I went through all 4 proposals. I understood why we deleted the Cape Built one. When I looked at them, I recognized they actually have some interesting experience, particularly around some of that village housing concept type stuff that they do out in the Cape. But I agreed with the Affordable Housing Trust that they were just shaky on the finance side. They appeared to be trying to transfer the market risk over to the town. I kind of attributed it to, well, you're not that familiar with what we do here, and you don't know the town that well. So first off, I agreed with that one being eliminated. I didn't follow why open space was eliminated, and let me run down why. And if you and the Affordable Housing Trust would like me to forward my spreadsheet that I did, that kind of is just me kind of looking at it and trying to compare things, I am more than happy to share that, and I'm more than happy to share it to the public for that matter, because it's just me doing what I did. In my view, at first blush, I didn't understand why open space was eliminated, and quite simply, it was because open space potentially has offered us the largest amount of money for that land of the three. And in fact, the recommendation of the Affordable Housing Trust is to go with the option that is the lowest offered price for the land, which I couldn't find a strong justification for. So that's at the mercenary part of me. That was the thing that jumped out at me. I looked at the Tamposi versus Medfield Holdings. Let me just go through the three. I'll tell you what I liked, the things that jumped out that I liked, the things that jumped out that I had concerns about. I fully recognize that some parts of what my reactions are is undoubtedly due to the fact I don't understand as much about this as the Affordable Housing Trust. So it's not an attack. Tamposi, there were a number of things that jumped out from that proposal. First off, Tamposi and Open Space both have delivered designs that involve single floor living. So they're fundamentally ranch style, where Medfield Holdings has some number of 2-story buildings. And that does not track with what I believe the seniors had said that they wanted over there by way of standalone units. So for me, although I could see that the 2-story designs were kind of neat for somebody who's not a senior looking for single floor living, my understanding of what we were doing there was single floor. So the other two at least only had the single floor ranches. Basically, Tamposi is slightly smaller than Open Space with their square footage, 1350 versus 1450, which I think was closer to what the target size for these houses was supposed to be, with the Medfield Housing, one of the designs, 1911 square feet. The ranch is 1556. And in my head, I kind of said we were looking for about 1500 square foot units. So that was where I thought the target was. On the Tamposi side, I had something I called special considerations. I thought the underground utilities was good. They made clear that the road was private, but I think everybody is proposing a private road. So I don't think that's a differentiator unless it is. I thought the gated emergency access to Bishop Lane was potentially a good thing just from the standpoint of safety. I thought the sidewalk to Ice House Road, as compared to Open Spaces walking path. I'm not sure what to make of that walking path relative to a sidewalk, but the idea they called that out, I'm guessing that Medfield Holdings probably has plans for a sidewalk. I just didn't see it called out the same way. It was unclear to me. It seemed to me Tamposi said that they were leaving space for the public to come so they could access the Bay Circuit Trail. And there was a place in Medfield Holding that said there was no public parking on the site. So that was a relative positive versus a negative. I've already talked about the prices. As I looked at it, the unit prices for the market rate units, Medfield Holdings is a more complicated because there's 2 designs, but basically I looked at the unit prices for the market units as being in the same ballpark, which is what gave me greater faith in the $1 million offer that came in from Medfield Open Space for the land. Tamposi actually had the best projected subsidized unit price of $215,000, so that was significantly lower than the other 2. I would, if we actually move ahead, I would just want to make sure that the age restrictions are clean. I think that both Medfield Holdings and Open Space had a straightforward age restriction on 100% of the units. It was a little unclear. Tamposi's proposed age restriction was that at least one member be over 62. And I didn't find that to be a very effective age restriction. So it seems to me that should be uniform, and it should be whatever we want it to be, not what a particular proposal says. On other issues, the requested waivers was probably one of the biggest concerns I had for Medfield Holdings. The other two didn't really have any unusual waiver requests. Medfield Holdings, in addition to offering the lowest amount for the land, wanted us to waive or reduce the permit fees, and what I'm not sure about if that's customary for a 40B, but they were the only ones that called it out, so I had a negative reaction to that. Requested that the town plow the roads in order to save the development money. I think it's a can of worms for us to get. This is a request. This is not a requirement, so I'm reacting to what was in the proposal, but they requested that. I think getting the town involved in plowing private roads opens up a can of worms that we don't want to open up. One that confused me was the request to tie in or receive other permission to use underutilized detention or retention basins on adjoining Ice House Road parcels. That for me is almost a showstopper without knowing exactly what it is we're talking about there. I would not want to see any restrictions on what the town is able to do with lot number 3 as a result of having put in some sort of a previous restriction. If this is an issue with wanting to tap into the COA, then to me it's a COA decision, and I'm not sure. And then they also want to use town loam and gravel if needed. I assume loam and gravel will be needed. So yet again, a cost to the town that the other two didn't have. My general comments, my broad comment is that as we first talked about the Hinckley property, we were talking about a building what I would call small a affordable senior housing, meaning senior housing that was in a price range that was affordable for seniors that did not qualify for 40B. Now, I think Mike, you can clarify this for me. I think the reason we're going the 40B route is if we want to have some sort of a denser development, that almost, in order to get to that point, it's almost got to be a 40B simply to configure the development the way it is. So if that's the case, I understand why we did why we did what we did, and obviously having a few more affordable units coming in, however they come in, is probably a good thing. Given that Medfield Holdings was 20 units, the other two were 24 units, and given that I don't know that we need to build 1,900 square foot units for the senior housing, I didn't see the reduction in the number of units to automatically be a positive. I actually saw it as being a minor detraction. The biggest concern I had is if we're talking about small A affordable housing, the way the seniors defined that was something on the order of 1,500 square foot single floor units. I'm not quibbling over the affordable units, but in terms of what the design actually is, I just didn't quite understand why the Medfield Holdings came to the top, given that for me it was off of the target and it wasn't attractive from a financial standpoint. I did look at the memo that the Affordable Housing Trust produced, and there were 3 reasons why the recommendation came out. The first one was talking about the stellar qualifications of Medfield Holdings, and I don't question that those qualifications are in fact stellar. However, to me, we have at least one other developer here who has similarly high quality qualifications. Tamposi has done work in Medfield, but I recognize doesn't have the same caliber. They don't have the same extent of qualifications as having done stuff in Medfield. The second item, development program concept meets parameters. I actually didn't think it, I thought Medfield Holdings did the worst job of meeting the parameters given my definition of what those parameters are as the seniors have defined them. And then the price proposal was viewed as a third advantage. I have no idea why the Affordable Housing Trust would consider the lowest price offered to be an advantage. So those are my reactions that don't, what I'm really saying is the recommendation isn't adding up for me, given my own independent evaluation, and I'm fully prepared to hear what it is I don't understand, but that was my reaction for the
Right. And so you didn't watch the 3-hour meeting or the discussion or the interviews with the
I did not.
developers.
I
Okay.
did not.
So let me start. I'm going to give you my perspective on this, and then I'm not speaking. Jim Brand is on it. If he wants to talk, he can talk as well. So I can cover a couple of things. But just conceptually here, one thing that is true about all of these developments is that the development that is built is not the development that is initially proposed. And so if you look, for example, as the Medfield Meadows development on the corner of 27 and Dale Street, obviously it looks nothing like what was originally proposed at 200 units. But even if you look at what came in with the LIP agreement at the outset, there were significant changes that happened in the ZBA process, even after we approved the LIP, as to the layout of the houses and the layout of the building. So as I looked at the proposals, I was interested to see the concepts, the layout, the general perspective. But my assumption with all of them was that after we picked one, we'd negotiate a PNS and then we'd negotiate a LIP agreement. And as we do with any LIP agreement, there would be input from neighbors, there'd be input from the public, because the next step after this award is to go through our usual LIP process. So there'll be a meeting with the butters, there'll be one or more meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust that get into a lot of these kinds of questions of, can you drop the unit price a little bit? Can you raise it a little bit? And this was part of the discussion at the trust meeting, which is, what would we like to see in change? And I think one of the things that came out of that, and one of my perspectives, at least on the Medfield Holdings, is that I agree with you, Gus, that I would like to see the units get a little smaller and to see if we can get a few more units. Jim Murphy, the lawyer for Medfield Holdings, was there, and he said that was likely possible. And I think the concept from Medfield Holdings is that they're going to kind of let people pick between the two units, right? So people can come and if they have an interest in one unit versus the other one, and so that it's not set in stone as to what the mix is going to be. But I had a similar reaction to that part of the proposal, and I had some similar reaction to some of the Tamposi proposals as well, that there was going to be some changes in the process. And so I kind of approached these proposals as, here's the proposal, whatever number we agree to is probably going to be the number as far as the price, but even that may be something as you get into it that gets reopened at some point, right? If you're in the process and something changes and we're making a request or they're making a request, it happens, right? I mean, it happens throughout the process that the circumstances change. And so I wasn't quite as hung up on the specifics of each proposal as I was on kind of at a general level, unit count, general concept. And the issues, I had two major issues with the open space proposal. Well, three, I guess. One is, to me, coming in off of Bishop Lane is just a non-starter. I mean, I just think it's a non-starter to extend that road. I just think there's a design concept. This was always kind of conceived of as a coming in off of Ice House Road. The second issue I had was that it seemed like it was the proposal into which the least thought had been placed. And so in reading through the proposal, there wasn't that much to it overall. And that sort of put up some red flags.
Mike, can I stop you just for one point?
Yeah.
The open space proposal I read didn't talk about coming in from Bishop Lane. They all three come in on Ice House Road.
Did I have that wrong? I thought I looked on the map and they had an entrance from Bishop Lane.
No, actually, I think there was one that proposed a safety gate, and that was Tamposi. That wasn't an access from Bishop Lane. It was simply a gated emergency access to from Bishop Lane. But all three of them have on their charts have them going out to Ice House Road.
Maybe I missed. Was that Cape Bill? I thought I had another map on that one, which I could be mistaken.
Okay.
If I was mistaken, then I just misread the map, in which case I only have two problems with it.
Okay.
The other problem is that it was sort of the flimsiest of the proposals, right? I think that sort of had the least work had been put into it, the least thought had been put into it, which when that's the case, it leads me to conclude that there's a lot that's going to change from this proposal to what comes in at the end. Whereas I thought Cape Bill, Open Space, Medfield Holdings and Tamposi had put an equal amount of effort and thought into the proposal, right? I mean, Cape Bill had the problems that you identified. And I thought, given that we had kind of simpler proposals for the other two or the other three, that it just was easy enough just to eliminate the other one. And the concern I had with the potential for the higher price was that it's kind of the same concern you raise with respect to the unit costs, and that the higher price for the land would come with higher price for the market rate units, right? The amount of money that would come to the town would go up as you raise the price of the market rate units. It's dependent upon a DHCD judgment about, the value of the land and what can be charged. And so given that the overall, it's nice to, as you recall, the first time we did this, we got no proposals at all.
Mhm.
It's nice that we got proposals that are going to put some money on the table that we certainly can use. But I wasn't as concerned with maximizing the dollars to the town as I was with getting this project built with the least amount of headache. And
So
I think,
could I give you just two quick reactions? One, I also looked, I recognize you're right, Open Space's proposal at 11 or 12 pages was considerably less than the 36 and 39 pages, I think, that Temposi and Medfield had. I looked at that as well, and I said, well, the real difference on those was primarily the absence of corporate experience and resumes and things like that from Open Space. So I would agree with the basic idea that was a thinner proposal. I didn't necessarily find the concept, the thinking of the basic concept to be all that far different. The price, though, at first I shied away from that hedge on the price, because it's like, well, you're not saying what you're going to buy it for. But what I did was I looked at what the actual issue was, and Open Space had proposed $500,000 to buy it if the unit price was 500,000, and it went up to $1 million if the purchase price was allowed to go to 530. So then I looked at the other two and I said, well, heck, Temposi was saying 500,000 for 480 to 530, and Medfield Holdings, you have to do the calculation. You have to know what the distribution between Cape and Ranch is, but that could be more than 530. Or, my view is it's got to be at least at cost. If anything, it's 530 or higher when you take the unit prices of the two different designs. So I'm kind of saying, all right, the way that was structured was made to sound variable, but as a practical matter, it matched the numbers that the other two did and offered to double it for basically $30,000 increase in the sales price, which is what they were projecting anyway. So that I looked at that because at first I didn't like it, and then I looked and said, well, what is it really saying? And it was like, it's not really. It's basically offering twice as much for $30,000, which is the high end of Temposi, and I'm not sure it's not the low end of Medfield Holdings.
Mr. Marcucci,
yes, Mr. Sorrell.
I have some process concerns with how this is proceeding.
Okay.
I'm assuming this went out as an RFP. You've got responses. The Affordable Housing Trust evaluated them, ranked them, made a determination. And there is that process. So I just caution as to where this is going.
What's the concern, Mark? I mean,
If the Affordable Housing Trust, and I don't recall offhand right now, is this property in the Selectmen or the Affordable Housing Trust?
Selectmen.
It's in the Selectmen,
Yeah.
but it was delegated to the Affordable Housing Trust for
a recommendation to the Selectmen.
All right, so consistent with 30B, Section 16, there's a recommendation on a priority basis, and I think that there's some binding effect to that would be the most diplomatic way to put it.
So
As opposed to redoing it here at the Board of Selectmen.
So just to be clear on where my conversation is, and I tried to make this clear at the start, I'm actually not arguing for an answer. What I'm saying is I've seen the recommendation, I've read the proposals. My statement is I don't understand the rationale. And I haven't seen the evaluation. Maybe one answer here is we table this and I have some more homework to do to see what the recommendation is. My purpose here is not to try to drive a conversation to get to a different answer than what the Affordable Housing Trust recommended. Given that it's coming before me to approve or not, the main issue that I'm saying is when I look at the proposals and I didn't see the inner evaluations of the Affordable Housing Trust, my own evaluation of those proposals led me to a point that said, I'm not sure I understand the recommendation. And that's, I don't know if that helps any from a legal standpoint, but my purpose in this discussion is not to change a recommendation or even to drive for a particular decision. I'm saying I'm not yet confident in the rationale behind the recommendation, and that's my purpose in this discussion. If that in any way, shape, or form helps make this more appropriate or conversation.
Mark, I think that question was addressed to you.
Like I said, I'm just kind of raising a red flag, if you will, as to compliance with process. You do not, in my opinion, given the way the process was executed here, have the discretion to pick and choose independently of the Board of Selectmen, or even frankly, to substitute your judgment for the Affordable Housing Trust, if they're the ones who went through the process of evaluating the criteria. Now, could you reject it outright, reject them all? Probably.
So let me ask, so I'm not trying to create a complex or flawed process. This is up before the two of us to vote either to approve the recommendation or not. If I hear what you're saying, our decision at this point in time with this information on the table is either to defer our vote pending getting more information that answers the questions I'm raising, or to have a vote to either approve the recommendation as it has been made or reject that recommendation. Is that what I hear you saying? I'm editorializing on my view of things that were not the recommendation for purposes of trying to understand the rationale. But if in fact I am not satisfied with the explanation of the rationale, what I think I hear you saying is my option and Mike's option as to selectmen voting on this is to simply reject the recommendation.
Perhaps to send it back to the Affordable Housing Trust to reevaluate.
That would be my preference.
Reevaluate, do something like that.
Mhm.
So I would say the one thing that's off the table would be substituting.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah, I don't think we're
okay.
heading in that
Yeah,
direction.
no.
I mean, are we not
Right.
allowed to explain the rationale of the trust's decision?
Oh, absolutely. But just sitting back here and hearing this for the first time, I was just concerned, and I've been debating how far it would
Yeah, okay.
stay out of this, frankly. But I was very concerned that it was headed in a direction of perhaps substituting.
No,
independently.
no. I mean, I think that the only thing we're going to decide is whether to accept or reject the recommendation. And I think Gus is entitled to understand why, at least in my view, the trust board reached the recommendation that it did, given the concerns.
Oh, I don't
raised.
I don't have a problem.
Right, and I don't think you can do that without reference to the other proposals. I don't think you can understand the rationale for picking proposal A without understanding proposals B, C, and D. I mean, is that wrong, Mark?
No, because presumably there was a full public discussion on all this anyway.
Yes.
And I would assume that since Gus wasn't party to that, you're simply summarizing or reporting to him what analysis took place.
And
Somebody can go back and see the backup on that.
Right, and two other things. I think what was just suggested is we may have a third option. If I'm not driving for an answer on how we're going to resolve this or come out on this tonight. But it sounded like the third option would be to simply say, well, here's the discussion you all probably heard, so you can hear what this discussion is tonight. Send it back to the Affordable Housing Trust to reconsider as yet a third option. So it's accept, reject, or simply return to the Affordable Housing Trust with this added stirring of the pot to see if the Affordable Housing Trust is rethinking anything. And I'm fine with all of that. I'm also fine with being given an assignment if that meeting was recorded to go watch that 3-hour meeting if it comes to that. I'm not even precluding the possibility, Mike, that you can answer my issues satisfactorily here, that I'll say, okay, I understand what you're saying, why you're saying it, and I'm prepared to move ahead with it. So I don't even want to take the idea of me. I'm not suggesting I'm not willing to approve this. It's just right now I don't fully understand it.
Right. No, I understand, and I'm just trying to articulate as best I can, kind of where we came out. So I think with respect to the price proposal from the open space, which was higher, I had the same reaction you did, and I think everybody else did, that this is a higher price proposal. But as you kind of get behind it and also look at that in light of the other proposals, and particularly given the sort of the detail and the pro formas for those other proposals and the various costs that were considered as part of it, I think I certainly had some skepticism about it, in the sense of whether, when there was more work put into it, was that number going to stick? Was that going to remain to be the same thing? And maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Right. And it was different enough. I mean, you had one builder saying, I can't get financing to pay anything for it. That was obviously a serious builder. Then you had two builders who, in my view, came in with kind of pretty similar proposals, somewhat similar layouts, similar, difference in the concept, but differences that I see as negotiable, or we're getting that. And then kind of one with a much higher price, but a lot less detail behind it. And that was a concern that I had. I think it was a concern that other trust board members had as well, that if we went in that direction, how much more work was left to be done. And I think, and this was a concern that I had, and that others expressed as well, with both Tamposi and Open Space, just kind of the other projects they have going on at the same time. So one of the questions that we asked Tamposi, because we kind of got the scoring that the trust board members did kind of clearly came out with Tamposi and Medfield Holdings as the top two. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they moved on to be interviewed in that meeting. Mm-hmm. And in the more recent meeting. And I think one of the questions we had, one of the things we were concerned about is what else are you working on? How much attention are you going to get? We had made a request from I had made a request from the building inspector to find out sort of what inspection issues had occurred at existing projects in the town. I think there were some oversight concerns raised with the Tamposi project in Medfield. And so one of the concerns I had was, this is in a somewhat sensitive location, in that it's right next to the senior center, right next to the Kingsbury Club. It abuts the neighborhood. It's a project of importance to the town. It's something we want to have happen. And to the extent it becomes more of a back burner item, because obviously Open Space has another kind of very important, prominent project in town over at the Clark Tavern. That was a factor as well. And I think, I don't know if that contributed to the somewhat, kind of less detailed proposal, particularly on the financial side. But I think that, and then as you came down to Tamposi and Opens and Medfield Holdings, that was an issue as well. Sort of for Medfield Holdings, this is the main project he's going to work on during this period of time. And if the primary interest is getting this done and getting it done kind of in a timely fashion, that one seemed to be the one most likely to achieve that particular piece of the goal. And our experience with him through the other two lips and through other projects has shown a pretty high degree of responsiveness to the ability to work around concerns of abutters and neighbors, and a lot of which were expressed during the meeting that we had a couple of Thursdays ago. And so I think, as to the open space proposal, that's kind of how I came out, why I ended up scoring it lower overall, given that aspect of the proposal. But I had the same reaction you did initially. This is interesting. Wow, why shouldn't we go for the money? But my concern was, well, how much time do we spend kind of getting to what the actual final proposal is going to be? Whereas the other two, and really, frankly, Cape Build as well, seemed like they had put a lot of work into it, and there were a couple of steps ahead. They were more ready to begin having the meetings about things like the precise unit size, the precise unit layout, the layout of the houses, because the big concern that was raised by the neighbors in the meeting, the second of the two meetings, was sort of the buffer between Bishop Lane and this project, and seeing if we can't kind of move it a little bit closer towards the
Mhm.
senior center
Mhm.
and create a little more of that buffer, which kind of would
Mhm.
be part of negotiating the specifics of the lip. And as we had asked in the interview, whether we could, if we went with the holdings route,
Mhm.
could we increase the unit count, which would probably decrease the size of the units and
Mhm.
decrease the price of the unit. So that was part of the
Okay.
consideration as well. But my expectation was with any of them is that when we were going through the lip process and negotiating the lip agreement, that there would be some, back and forth, as there usually is. There usually is in that process. Kind of what is the town looking to achieve? I'm remembering back again to the Medfield Meadows. Kind of there was a lot of discussion about the unit count, how many would be rental, how many would be for sale, what would the setup of those be? And then actually in the ZBA process is when they dealt with a lot of the engineering issues, which led to the change in the layout, right? The actual, because I'm terrible at the spatial part of it, but I mean, the original layout of what's there now is the same unit count. It was the same number of rental units, the same number of for sale units. But it was a very different layout than when it came through the ZBA process. And I think in the end, and I can't summarize everybody's input. I think everybody thought it was a close vote between Tamposi and Medfield Holdings. I think it was a 5-1 vote was the final recommendation. I think the overall kind of ease of operation and how smoothly it was likely to go and the experience and everything else and the focus, frankly, that builder would be able to bring to this project in that location to get us to completion in the most efficient way was probably outweighed the $50,000 difference between the two of them.
All right. All right, Mike, I'm confident you and I share the same objectives in what we're trying to build here. Are you satisfied that the Affordable Housing Trust has done a credible and as far as you can perceive it to be the best, have come to the best answer they can take? And everything, I appreciate your explanation and the various considerations you covered. Are you satisfied that process that the Affordable Housing Trust has carried out has, to the best of your ability to judge it, arrived at the best of these? I'm going to say 3 proposals because I threw the open space back in, but you're satisfied they obviously did it properly, but that their judgment was arrived at a decision that you would feel is in fact the best, given how we have to handicap all the things we don't know and all the flexibilities we have. You're satisfied this is the best recommendation?
I am, and I kind of purposely stayed out of the discussion at the Affordable Housing Trust, as I've done on these lips, because it's a little odd to be in the position of kind of being on the board and then also reviewing it. It's like, I don't want to,
especially when it's just the two of us to do.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I get that.
Thanks for your input, everybody, but I've got a
Right,
higher percentage of the vote.
Right.
Right.
If you are you've heard what my concerns were. I'm happy with your responses to those concerns. They're judgment calls. I get it. If you're happy and satisfied that this is in fact the best decision of these 3 options to the best of our ability to size that up, I certainly don't have any concerns about Medfield Holdings. It's that we're going off a cliff or anything here. I'm willing to go ahead and move ahead with supporting this if you're comfortable that this is really the best decision.
No, I am, and I kind of went into the discussion. I didn't have I think I came to the same conclusion when I ranked them. I think my rankings were very similar on when we did the numerical rankings that we did. And it was one of those where I was genuinely interested to kind of see where it was going to come out. And I think given the quality of the discussion and just my experience on the board with the members of the board, I think they all took it very seriously and put a lot of time into it. And so, I would be loath to substitute my judgment for theirs either, frankly.
Right. Well, as I think you may already appreciate, when we ask people to work on boards and volunteer, I can't guarantee that I'll always approve or rubber stamp or confirm every recommendation from every board, but my predisposition going into it is to support a board that's carried its responsibilities out properly, without me having to second guess every decision that they've made. So I've heard enough. I'm comfortable with the recommendation. With particularly your reinforcement of that recommendation, having heard my concerns and responded to them. So I'm okay. I'm ready to go ahead and approve this.
All right. So I think then the motion is to kind of award the RFP to Medfield Holdings and then kind of instruct the town administrator and town council to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement and LIP agreement with the Medfield Holdings following the LIP process with the Affordable Housing Trust. So it'll be a meeting with the butters and then going through the LIP process normally. So it'll come back to us at some point for approval of the final LIP agreement. And I imagine that the PNS, everything will be contingent on all, resolution of the whole project. But I see Mark is going to tell me I've just said something incorrect. So
But
Mark?
technically what you're doing is you're selecting them to negotiate an LDA or whatever you purchase and sale, whatever you're going to use, the documents. So it would be a vote to award subject to reaching agreement with this developer on the terms of the operative documents.
all right. So I would move that we give that to me again. Are we awarding it or are we authorizing the negotiation of?
Yeah, you're basically just designating them at this point as the first selection and authorizing a negotiation with them.
Okay.
Or you can award it subject to, however you want to word it. Just make it clear that it is subject to reaching agreement on the terms of the operative documents with the preferred developer.
Right. So I would then move that we authorize the negotiation of a purchase and sale agreement and local initiative project agreement with Medfield Holdings in response to the request for proposal issued with respect to the Hinckley South property and any other agreements necessary to carry out the purposes of that RFP. Does that work, Mark?
Yep.
Just one clarification, and we are authorizing the Affordable Housing Trust to be the agency that does that negotiation.
I think we should authorize the town administrator and the town council to negotiate the PNS.
Okay.
I think it should be carried out by then. The LIP agreement will go through the Affordable Housing Trust process. So amending the motion to authorize the town administrator and town council to negotiate the purchase and sale agreement and for the local initiative project agreement to go through the process laid out according to the procedures of the Affordable Housing Trust.
Okay. Second.
Mr. Murby?
Aye.
And Mr. Marcucci, aye.
So we will also remove this article, the Hinckley South article, from the annual town meeting warrant.
Yes, we will. What are we down to, 47 now?
I think we're down to like 46 and a half.
46?
We're getting there.
Unless you guys want us to keep it in there as leverage for your negotiation of the purchase and sales agreement.
There's a few others floating around out there. Never land.
Okay.
Okay. Let me
I see the police chief is here as well.
she's here, so let me pull her in.
Pete can come back now, right? Maybe he's out getting a pizza.
Hi, good evening.
There he is.
Hi, Chief.
Hi, Michelle.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, no, thank you for having me, although it seems like I'm interrupting a very stimulating conversation between all of you, learning the answers of the right language in open meeting. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me tonight, and I appreciate your pushing me off a little bit so I could get settled at home with my daughter. As you know, over the last 2 years, one of our primary objectives in the department was to create some growth and career opportunities for our members within our own organization. We've done that pretty well with the introduction of our K-9 and crisis response trainer, as well as a civil rights officer. We've recently expanded our field training officer program, where we take our veteran officers and pair them with our newest members to kind of complete their training. And we've also created a detective unit within the department, which consists of one full-time and one part-time detective. We were able to accomplish these objectives with no increase to our budget, while giving a lot of opportunity for our members to learn new skill sets and have some satisfaction within their own careers and framework of our organization. The reason I'm coming to you tonight is we have another opportunity for growth within the department. I have a vacant sergeant's position. Over the last 6 months, we posted a promotional examination, and on March 6th, we had a candidate take the examination and pass it. Officer Connor Ash has been with our department since September of 2019. He transferred to us from Franklin and has proven himself to be an asset in the department almost instantly. He has a high competency level with the law, as well as an incredible work ethic. He kind of hit the ground running and has volunteered for many different things within the department, including becoming a field training officer and demonstrating a capacity to do investigations, which is why we internally promoted him to part-time detective. Somehow during all of these extra responsibilities that he took on, he found time to study for the sergeant's promotional exam, which is no small feat. And as I said, he was successful in that endeavor. I think that his addition to our department has been incredible. I think he brings a lot to the table. He demonstrated a capacity to instruct and supervise during the field training officer program, where he trained several of our new officers. I believe that he would represent the type of supervisor that I'm looking for in our organization and that the town is looking for, as well as he would provide valuable supervision to our newest members who kind of are in need of, most of that guiding and good advice and good guidance on the street. So tonight I am asking you to continue our path towards career growth and opportunities within the department. And I respectfully request that you authorize the promotion of Officer Connor Ash to the position of sergeant. Hang on, that's the bat phone.
Oh, I thought those were trumpets announcing that.
That's the ring that gets my attention.
That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you for that, Chief. Gus, any comments, questions?
No, I will acknowledge a very strong endorsement from the chief for this promotion, and I also noted that. I think you did too, Pete.
Mike, how about you?
I have no questions. I think this is great and good news for the department as we get back to full strength at all levels. So good news.
Great. Connor, congratulations and thanks for doing it. And do we have a motion?
I don't know if Connor was going to say something before we.
I just wanted to say thank you. That's all.
All right.
I thought Mike wanted to see him sweat a little bit.
Sounds like you're doing a great job, Connor. So thank you very much for what you're doing for the town.
Thank you.
So I would move that we appoint Connor Ash as a sergeant in the Medfield Police Department.
Second.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Murby.
Aye.
And Mr. Marcucci. Aye.
Congratulations, Connor.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'll let you get back to your very stimulating conversation. Have a good night.
I've got to ask Connor if he's ever been mistaken for Vince Gill.
I don't think so. I don't even know who that is.
Oh,
you got to know. Wait a minute. Recount.
Is it too late? Can we take that back?
Wait.
They're very well-known country folks.
Thank you, Chief.
So, Chief, you got to work on the country. Well,
I got rid of her. Sorry. I just wanted to ask Mike and Gus. Joe Sear is in the Q&A and asked if he would have, is there a chance the neighborhood could speak or ask questions about the Hinckley property? And I realized that we did not take any public comment before we took the vote.
I will recuse myself if you're going to do that.
And then Bill Massaro also had a technical question about whether I messed up the motion as well. So we can redo the motion if I somehow messed it up. Maybe Mark.
In the three different versions of the motion, I think I got it, but
Okay.
just in case.
I think we may need to establish a post of a town parliamentarian, and I nominate Bill.
Well, I may be about to be fired as clerk of the board anyways. My last motion could be a bungled one. So we can redo it if we need to. So it's up to you, Gus. I mean, I got a
I
lot
think-
of input from the neighbors at the trust meeting, and I'm happy to hear from Joe again. I spoke to Joe separately as well.
Mhm.
I'm always happy to take public comment, so I'm happy to take public comment. And there's going to be under the LIP procedures at a butters meeting specifically with the developer. There will also be public hearings with the Affordable Housing Trust specifically about the details of the proposal. But I'm also happy to hear whatever Joe has to say, unless you object, Gus.
And I certainly don't object. I think when in our conversation, I knew also that there'd be neighbors here. I thought it was when you made it clear that it's the LIP processes where a lot of that public input would have an influence. I didn't push for that, but if Joe would like to speak, I think be more than happy to hear what he has to say now.
I may, not only as part of the LIP process, there'll be a full-blown CBA hearing as
Right.
well.
Right.
But
anyone who will suffer through one of our meetings deserves an opportunity to speak. So
exactly.
Okay, so I think the easiest thing to do is if you'd like to speak tonight is just put your full name and address in the Q&A, and then I can recognize you to speak. Okay, and Joe, you were first.
That was interesting. It looked like can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
Okay. Sorry. It looked like I had hit the lead button for some reason and it bounced me back in. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys letting me speak. And I do know that I talked at the Affordable Housing Trust and I know Mike was there and I talked to Mike separately. But I guess I'm speaking, asking Mike to put on his selectman hats now. And Gus, I didn't have the opportunity to speak to you at that time. So I guess a lot of it is just a little bit of radiation from what I had talked about before. But first I want to say I appreciate the town for, wanting to put in the senior housing and I understand the benefits to the town in terms of the tax revenue. Me speaking is not to, say that that's not, a worthy effort. But I guess as a current taxpayer and a butter, I guess I was somewhat concerned that the Affordable Trust didn't take into the neighborhood into consideration before putting out the RFP. Kind of to some degree, kind of pitted the neighborhood against the town. To almost like where the town is acting like a hostile, builder coming in and putting up 40B housing, which I don't think anybody wants, and I think that no one wants to go down that route. So I hope that that the town, because they own the land and it should give, has control over the land, we'll try to make it a win-win situation for the town, the seniors that will be moving in the neighborhood that's been here for 20 plus years. So when we purchased in this neighborhood, I think everybody here understood that the land would be developed. But the expectation was that it would be developed, with the current zoning of the existing property. With 40B, the zoning changes the buffers, the setbacks, and density. I just asked that the selectmen and the board take into consideration the neighborhood's input on, buffer zones between the neighborhood and the plan, setbacks, locations of plantings of like a natural barrier, potentially privacy fences. And that there is, and I know that there's been mentioned that there would be no cut through to Bishop Lane, but I think that's high on the priority list of the neighborhood, right? I guess as we go through the LIP and the proposal process, I would hope that the selectmen, because they do oversee, they oversee the land and they have control of it. They're not a hostile 40B builder, right? We hope that they're not. That they take us into consideration. And, I think there is a genuine concern with the buffer in that they would hope that they work with the, Council on Aging ahead of time to negotiate some level of relief from the neighborhood. Especially where, the neighborhood is taxpayers, right? And the senior center is, a piece of town land and it doesn't pay taxes. And then at the development itself should be linked to the senior center more so than a neighborhood with, a bunch of kids running around. it seems like it's much more of an addition to the senior center than it is to our neighborhood. But I just hope that that's into consideration, and that you'll openly work with the neighborhood and work with the Council on Aging to provide us some relief with a buffer. And any guidance in that effort would be very helpful. Ideally for us, it would be better that it got discussed up front with the Affordable Housing Trust, so that it could have been built into the RFP. Because anytime you leave it to the builder's discretion, there's always, I guess, for lack of better words, wiggle room and adjustments that can be made, as opposed to being discussed and negotiated up front. So I guess with that, I'll kind of close and just ask that the selectmen, take us into consideration when they act as basically the subcontractor of this property, and that they kind of treat us as they would, other projects in town. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Next, we have Meg Femino at 4 Bishop Lane.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you all very much for letting us speak a little bit this evening. I want to echo what Joe Sear says. I am directly next to the town land at 4 Bishop Lane, across the street from Joe. And I would really appreciate also the input of the neighborhood when we start this project. I think it would be important for it to get into the RFP. Especially with the buffer to keep the character of this neighborhood. If there, I know with the 40B zoning, it is different, but could it be different in the senior housing pods themselves? But could we put a little more buffer between us and them so we do keep the character of the neighborhood? I understand that the Medfield Holdings proposal does not have a gate that would semi-open up Bishop Lane. I think that would be a big detriment to the neighborhood. Even though it's a gate, if you start putting it into your MapQuest and things like that, it's going to bring you down there, even though there's a gate there, and into the neighborhood, which will cause a lot of traffic, which would be very disruptive to the neighborhood. So I just want to echo, I hope we can work with the town. I can hope we can all be good neighbors in this project. I do see value to the town and for people of the town to have senior housing in town. But I would hope that we could work a little bit on some of the buffer in and around the project itself from the neighborhood.
Mr. Marcucci?
Mr. Sorrell?
Yeah, as a point of information for those out there listening, 40B does not have its own zoning requirements. What it is a mechanism that allows a developer to modify the existing zoning or even override it in order to accomplish whatever the project is that's being proposed. It's obviously something that's negotiable depending what it is, and is part of the whole process all the way through. And it would be important, I would suggest, for the neighbors to make sure that they attend public meetings and make their concerns known.
Yeah, and just to thank you, Mark. I mean, just as part of the LIP process, which is because the town is in safe harbor now through May of 2022, the LIP process is called a local initiative project. It's essentially a friendly 40B that's negotiated with the town. That was what was proposed in the RFP. It was what was proposed at town meeting when the town meeting authorized this RFP 2 years ago. And that's what was in the RFP when it was issued both times. And that has a lot of neighborhood input in it. I mean, one of the things that we added to the LIP process, which some developers have declined to participate in, but Medfield Holdings has agreed to and has done it twice before, starts with a neighborhood meeting. And so this is in a little bit of an odd situation because, or different situation, because it is the land that is owned by the town. And so we have to go through a procurement process first before we then go through the LIP process, which has a butter input up front. Then there are hearings with the Affordable Housing Trust. In that process, a lot of the parameters are covered. I think I've spoken to several neighbors already about the buffer issue and about being able to reorient it a little bit down towards the senior center. And that's something that I think we've, to everyone I've spoken to, committed to working on as part of this. And to the extent that the board's involvement is necessary, we'll be involved with that. But I think in general, our LIP process has been pretty open and allows for a lot of opportunities for neighborhood and neighbor and townwide involvement. Some developers probably say it's too much. They have to go to too many meetings and hear too much, but it has led to the ZBA process, which again, the ZBA process is also a public meeting process where there's public input there as well. It's generally made the ZBA process go a little more smoothly. So while there's more work for the developer up front, they get a little more, they get a little bit back on the back end because there's less to do. You don't find out about things in the ZBA process, you find out about it beforehand. So I'm sure once we work out the agreement, this is part of the agreement, right? That the developer will schedule a meeting. It'll probably have to be on Zoom, unfortunately, but schedule a meeting with the neighbors and kind of go through the process that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We have any other comments? Deb Barrow is joining the meeting.
Oh. Okay, how are you?
Hey, Deb.
Hello, Deb.
How are you doing? So I just want to add my voice to the mix. I want to thank everybody because there's a lot of hard work, and I did attend that Affordable Housing Trust meeting. But I just want to point out, and I want to just as a factual matter, that the decision making tonight, which is very thoughtful and took some time, but you had one select person who recused himself, and then you had another select person who really deferred some decision making to a third select person, and that select person was actually sitting on the all of the meetings and possibly voting on and participating in a final agreement with the Affordable Housing Trust. So at the end,
Deb, can I make a correction to that? I did not defer to Mike on this one. I basically looked to him to help me understand things that I didn't understand. My decision was my own, not a deferral.
Okay, well, as I heard it, and I may, we can disagree on how that may have come across or what the intent was, but it really sounded to me as if an ultimate, sort of processing piece was left with one select person who had in fact participated, throughout the process and coming to the recommendation. And I don't say that that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, and I'm saying that's an incorrect characterization of what I did.
Okay, so we'll just agree to disagree. But in terms
for
of
the record, that is not what I did.
Okay, all right. But I just wanted to, that's just my interpretation and to put that on the record as well. So that's all, and thanks so much for your time tonight.
Okay.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Deb.
Okay. I don't have any other questions at this time.
Silent pause is brought to you by.
Then our next agenda item is discussions, COVID-19 status update, CARES funding update. Chris, anything on that?
No, last week I gave you the CARES funding update and what we had spent so far. We'll actually change this now to the ARP funding. We're still waiting for the Treasury on that. So we will hopefully have an update next week.
Is there any indication as to, we're apparently contributing $2.5 million to Norfolk County in our name or something. Am I understanding that correctly?
So the county government is receiving that directly.
Yeah.
Similar to how we're receiving our 1.28 million. So there've been a lot of discussions with the Norfolk County town administrators and Norfolk County as to how this is going to work. Obviously, they're going to receive $138 million for the county. So we're trying to work out whether or not that's going to be a pass through to the towns, which would be an additional $2.5 million to us, or if there are some projects that the county does. Obviously, they have the courthouse. They have the registry of deeds. They do have some capital expenditures that they indicated they might be able to use this for, but there's an ongoing discussion as to making sure that money is sent to the cities and towns within that county.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Christine, is that money? I read the presentation that talked about the purposes of this money. I'm not sure if it addressed that money there, but if the county is looking at updating their registry of deeds, that doesn't sound like a COVID-driven capital expenditure. Is this particular money more of an economic stimulus without, needing to be an extraordinary expense associated with COVID?
That is what everybody is thinking, but again, we don't have any sort of final guidance from Treasury, but it is intended to be an economic stimulus money.
Okay.
Things moving. So
good.
But while we were having that conversation with the county, I think everybody it was brand new. It was last week. So everybody was still trying to figure out, what they could possibly use it for. The 28 town administrators and town managers, mayors were adamant that money be directed directly to the cities and towns within the county. So I imagine we'll have some extensive discussions in the next couple of weeks.
A lot of the counties have turned their courts over to the state, but Norfolk hasn't done that.
No, Norfolk County still operates the courthouse and the registry of deeds, the retirement system. So that's still active.
All right. Then the next item is our fiscal year 2022 operating and capital budgets and financial policies. Vote to increase the override for the municipal building stabilization fund by 2.5% to $1,076,890.
And this is your annual vote in relation to the municipal building stabilization fund. When we created the fund, the Board of Selectmen have the authority to increase the fund by 2.5% every year. And we have built that into this budget, as you know, so we're just looking for a formal vote for the record.
Any questions, Gus, Mike?
Nope. So I would move that we increase the override for the municipal building stabilization fund by 2.5% to $1,076,890.
Second.
Mr. Peterson.
Yep.
Mr. Murby.
Yes.
And Mr. Marcucci. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
Next item is 2021 annual town meeting and warrant articles.
Actually, if I could just say
Sure.
some items that came out of the warrant committee last night. I've been asked by the warrant committee to brief you on how they would like to balance the budget. Nick, if you can just bring up Sharon's spreadsheet, you'll recognize it as Sharon's spreadsheet because it's purple. And let me just review some of Sharon's notes on this. So the goal, which is similar to the goal of my staff when we put this budget together, was fiscally responsible in approving what is to be spent. We were very concerned that we included capital in our budget this year, meet the reserve policy, the free cash policy, and make sure that we did not further continue down the road last year where we didn't put money into stabilization, we didn't fund OPEB. So all of those were key parts of building this budget. So given that there's currently a deficit of $420,000, we're using just under $1 million to do the capital stabilization and the OPEB that I just mentioned. We can meet the reserve and the free cash policies, but we still have this $421,000 deficit to close. The warrant committee took a vote last night to remove Article 7 from the warrant. And I believe you all received an email and a letter this evening from Dr. Marsden and Jess Riley, the chair of the school committee, and they have also recommended withdrawal of Article 7. Article 7, we had agreed back in the fall to put this on in case there were any COVID-related expenses in the town's budget, on the school side of the budget, that was not covered by any of the stimulus that came in, the CARES money, anything that caused their budget to be in a deficit. They have sent a memo saying that they don't need that money. They are able to balance their budget for fiscal year 21, and they would like to withdraw that article. So based on that, the warrant committee would like to talk about getting that $421,000 deficit down a little bit. They would like the selectmen to think about not putting in the $15,000 for the economic vitality article. We currently have a balance of $21,000 in there, and I do believe that the stimulus money coming in will allow us to use that for those types of activities. The warrant committee would like the planning board to hold on the $20,000 on the zoning diagnostic until next year. And there's some discussion of whether or not we need to fund the full $75,000 for the public health nurse, or if we can cut that funding in half and work on grant funding or something similar to that. If those three things are done, they can reduce the deficit to $350,000. Given all of that, we can meet all of our policies if we include the 681 in part of our estimate. We can meet our free cash and our reserve fund policy by either leaving the full 420,000 in or the 350,000. The warrant committee is recommending at this time either of those be used and funded with free cash to balance the budget. So I was asked to present that to you this evening for your thoughts and ideas. They would like to have a discussion about it on Thursday evening at their meeting. So your thoughts?
Gus, do you want to react first?
Sure. First thing that I would like, and Nick, I don't know whether I can lean on you reasonably for this. I'd like an update to my score sheet using these numbers, because I I did look at this and I provided some comments back to Sharon yesterday, but they were preliminary. And my point was, this is a different score sheet than the score sheet I'm using, and I can't exactly reconcile the two just off the top of my head. So is it possible for you to update the score sheet I use with
Sure.
this updated picture? So I'll say that. I have one question on this, and again, I didn't follow up with Sharon on this. Under financial policy test, second line down, excess or shortfall in reserves to meet 9%. Under the purple column, it says minus 414,000, which sounds like we're 414,000 short of the 9%. Help me understand that number relative to, like, that looks like we have in terms of our targets, that looks to me like we have a $414,000 shortfall, but I can't tell if that's because it's not counting the money that's going to drop to the bottom line. Right now, that looks like this is not a picture of how we actually hit all of our targets, but I didn't understand the sheet well enough to be able to know that. So what's the minus 414,000? What does that represent?
To get to the 9%, the town would need another $414,000 in its reserves to get there. So if the reserve policies state that it's a goal of 9 to 12%, but not less than 7.5%. So the test that was applied was, is this meeting the 7.5% threshold?
Okay.
It would not meet the 9% threshold.
So what I guess, and this is an observation for both Mike and Pete. I'm not, again, not taking out a position. My guess would be at this point in time, when we're actually expecting some significant relief funds coming in that aren't here yet, but they're likely to come in, this would be the time to try to get that to 9% rather than simply expend it elsewhere. And I'm not, it's not a position yet. I'm just trying to understand why we're being so timid at a time that I'm picturing that there's going to be some relief funds coming in, and 6 months from now, we're going to be having a discussion about the money that we have and what we want to do with it. So just help me understand why we wouldn't want to hit the 9%.
So as I understand this, Gus, this is because we don't have the regulations yet from the Treasury about what we can use the stimulus for.
Mm-hmm.
This is assuming no use of stimulus in this budget. My view is, I agree with you, that assuming we can use it, that we ought to close the deficit this year, assume it's 350, with stimulus, right?
Mm-hmm.
No use of free cash for operations.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we should frankly take a chunk of the stimulus and use it for capital for the next 2 years, spread that over 2 years, which helps on two fronts. And then we have a little bit left after that, right? So if you take the 1.28 million the number that we've used in the capital budget committee this morning was essentially 350 for capital each of the next 2 years added to what we already have. And so what the capital budget committee voted to approve today was essentially adding 350 to what we'd already approved for capital, mostly by turning leases into straight purchases. And so we're not adding more stuff, but we're taking on less debt. And by taking on less debt, we free up for next year. Assuming we add 350 to the 750 we're planning to spend next year for capital, that would again enable us to get, make up our capital deficit, right? Of all this stuff, this backlog of stuff we haven't bought. If we did that, that would leave about $528,000 of the 1.28 million of stimulus, of which you could use 350 for this deficit here, and then there'd be like 175 left for to talk about, right? I think frankly some of that should go to putting it back into economic vitality so we can do some stuff this summer and fall to boost economic activity in the town, whether it's concerts or events that will bring people here. I think that would be a good stimulus use, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't love the idea. I'm with you on the free cash usage. I won't object to the warrant committee adopting this budget provisionally, given that we don't know what the regs are. But if the regs were to come out and say we can't use, for some reason, we can't use the money directly for the deficit, I'd want to see what those regs are and take another look at it at that point. Because I agree with you, we should use, essentially last year's budget, we cut a lot of stuff, cut a lot of capital, we cut a lot of stuff, and we really over several years have a backlog of stuff we haven't spent on, using the stimulus to get us caught up on that, and which would have the net effect of the sort of the cascading effect you're talking about of boosting the reserves, because you wouldn't be then spending that money on out of the reserves necessarily. So I think we're on the same page with that. But I appreciate what the warrant committee is trying to do, which is get to a balanced budget without much pain or wailing or gnashing of teeth in this final process, with that kind of as the circumstances exist on March 23rd, recognizing there could be an adjustment once the Secretary of the Treasury releases their regulations, which hopefully will be soon. And then there could be a further adjustment depending on what happens with that Norfolk County money.
Got it. Okay. So that part, so Nick, I really do need to see that score sheet to understand what my total reaction is to this and from an integrated picture standpoint. As I think everybody here on this meeting is aware, I'm very sensitive to the town maintaining a balance in its expenditures between town and school budgets. And I don't see us doing very much to do that. If anything, I see us kind of just not, it seems like this is a time when we should be working to restore that balance. And I'm not sure I'm seeing that in what this is all lining up to, which is why I want to see the scorecard. But I can say a couple of broad points. Number one, recognizing that money that will drop to the bottom line makes me more willing to tap into the free cash. Whether it's if all we're doing is not complying with our policies because of a timing issue, and we know that there's money there that's going to drop to the free cash that makes up for the excess free cash we pull out because of the timing around budget, I don't have a problem with us doing that, as long as I know we fundamentally are staying, even if we can't officially claim some of this as recognized revenue for purposes of this formal budgeting process. As long as I know it's there, I'm fine with that. I started off when I first saw the 70K in cuts, my first predisposition was, here we go again, cutting townside budgets. However, I didn't have a problem with the 15,000 because I agree with the warrant committee when they said the economic vitality fund was never intended to be this endowment that we were going to build up. It was always intended to be a modest budget that was accessible to the selectmen to support important things in town that hadn't come in. And so I agree with their philosophy of not overfunding the economic vitality fund. And I'm even more comfortable, Christine, with your point about some of this relief funds are probably things that we could use for the kinds of things. So I'm fine with that. If the planning board is fine with the 20,000 on that preliminary thing, I'm fine with that too, because I'm not, it wasn't that clear that was a pressing need as I read it not fully understanding it in the first place. Initially, I was not fine with the $75,000 cut. Christine, you've communicated with me, and I was only not fine with it because I thought the town said they needed it.
Well, before you say anything, I think the Board of Health is going to come in next Tuesday to tell you they definitely would like the full funding for it.
Okay, well, so if that's the case, on my score sheet, the town has already covered 420,000 or so of an $840,000 shortfall. So I have a somewhat jaundiced view of deciding that the 70K cut on the town side needs to be further made to not, if in fact that's a need we have for a public health nurse, I do not believe that is the most important position that we should cut to cut down that. So I have a lingering concern about that until I hear from the town that this is just not an important thing, or we can do it at half the cost. If that's the case, I'm not going to argue about it. If we say as a town operating budget, we don't need it, then that's fine. Then more power to where we are, where it is needed. But I'm sensitive to the balance. I don't see a good long-term trajectory that doesn't maintain that balance. It's just why I'm sensitive to it. And so at this point, I don't have a fundamental argument with what the warrant committee is trying to do. I have a couple of lingering questions that I think will be cleared up once I see my total score sheet updated to where I understand more fully what exactly we're doing here relative to the way that I score this.
So I think in general, this makes sense to me to do it this way. And I agree with my colleagues that we want to maintain our reserves and our position on those as much as we can. So
could I ask one? I did have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I always forget. Mike, you brought up a different issue. You talked about, well, we're going to use $350K for capital expenditures to purchase equipment that we were previously going to lease. I have previously heard that particularly at this point in time, given the interest rate structure, you're nuts not to lease equipment. And so it's not that I wouldn't want to put the 350,000 into a capital reserve. The only question I have is, why is it just because we have the money that we aren't going to continue with our strategy of leasing, if in fact leasing was a financially attractive strategy given the interest rate environment that we're in? Right?
So,
why not just put it in and have it be a higher reserve?
So I think even if we stuck with the leasing strategy, we would just look to lease more and kind of get started on that front.
Okay. Yep.
Because we have more to make up, right? We kind of when we built the capital budget this year, it was sort of the really need to haves. Like, it was not everything that would have been. It's not everything that was on our original 5-year plan for last year and this year. So it was kind of the most pressing items that were on kind of 2 years worth of that original 5-year plan budget. I think the warrant committee had some concern about the leasing and what the impact that, because it's a combination of leasing and bonding, the impact that would have potentially on our bond rating going out for the Dale Street bonds if we were taking on additional debt in advance of that. I think there was some concern that by the time we actually went out, given what's happening with interest rates, kind of just rumbles out there with interest rates, but that by the time we actually went out to do the leases or do the bonding or do the borrowing, that it would be higher, it wouldn't be quite as attractive. And so, and so as we looked at it, there were some items we had to lease, and we kind of came up with a sort of a rule of thumb that if something's more than $150,000, then we probably have to lease it. Under 150, we try not to lease it, which would, smaller commitments next year, we'd get stuff a little bit potentially quicker and be able to have it longer. So where you have a car that would be a 3-year lease, if you buy it and it lasts 5, it helps you out a little bit more than having to lease another car at the end of that. So I think that was it was a combination of we had a balance between lease and buy, and just shifting the balance a little bit more towards buying.
So the things that we currently are planning to lease, we're still planning to lease. It's just that there may be some additional things we're planning to buy rather than lease because we have the money available to buy it.
Some of the smaller, police cars, for example, the police cars we were planning to lease, we shifted those to buying. There were some other vehicles that were vehicles that were $75,000 and under for the most part, that we were going to shift from leasing to buying. And
that's because we're actually hoping we'll get a windfall on the back end of the lease by having by buying it, we'll we're not just leasing it, then the lease ends and then we lose the vehicle. But in fact, if we buy it and it lasts longer than the period of the lease, we actually get more practical use out of the vehicle than we would have if we've leased it.
So Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, are you talking about actually lease purchases? As opposed to,
No, we're talking about buying things instead of leasing them.
but as far as when you talk about leasing, you're talking a lease purchase, which is basically, looks like it's basically borrowing in advance and end up at the end where you own it, which I think was talked about at least for the fire equipment.
That's what we did for the fire. I don't know, Nick can speak to the details of it.
It would
And the other
it'd all be lease purchases.
these purchases. All right.
So my
So, I mean,
only,
just for the benefit of people at home who are thinking in their heads, leasing and then you lose it. This is a completely different concept.
Yeah,
This is
okay.
basically, you are allowing a third party to finance your purchase and they call it a lease.
Mhm.
DOR treats it as debt, frankly. And, but it can be a win-win.
So what's behind the question that I've asked is that earlier in the year, I think it was, I don't even remember who I had the conversation with. I'm not even sure if it was here in the Board of Selectmen. It was a conversation I had that said, gee, with the interest rate environment that we're in, it makes sense to lease rather than buy just because it's financially attractive. So the rationale that I heard earlier in the year for leasing, which was a strategically smart thing to do. And now suddenly we have, I'll call it a windfall, but that's probably not the right word for it. We have the appearance of additional capital funds, and suddenly we're using a different rationale, at least as I'm hearing it. And I'm saying, if this thing made strategic sense earlier in the year, it seems to me it still makes strategic sense given the interest rate environment now. So I'm not clear why we're changing strategies away from that. That's what's really behind my question.
I think that, yeah, I mean, and Nick can speak to this as well. I mean, I think it is a good strategy. It's particularly a good strategy when you have $2.5 million worth of stuff to buy and you have $750,000. So and that's kind of where we were in putting the budget together. And so if we had $2 million, we wouldn't have said, well, it's a great strategy to incur interest, because it's not, right? I mean, if you can avoid the interest cost, you can avoid the interest cost. I think in light of what our needs were on the capital side, it was a good year to do it. And I think our view was it's probably a 1-year deal, because who knows what's going to happen with the interest next year. And so, and again, we're not eliminating the leasing. We're just reducing the amount of the leasing. It makes the town treasurer a little less nervous, and it does save some interest costs, but it's still, as I said, it's just shifting the balance between the two.
Okay.
And obviously the presence of the arrival of the windfall is not unrelated to the potential for higher interest rates in June or July.
Right. Well, that's, yeah. Okay. All right.
I mean, Nick, did I get anything wrong on that?
No, I would just to add a little additional context. So we had a conversation with the town's financial advisor a few months ago, and at the time, long-term debt issuances were going around 0.5% to 1%.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, a issuance that they were working on went for 2% on a 20-year municipal bond debt issuance. So you're seeing that increase. So that changes some of the dynamic for the town, especially if that were to continue at the same pace over the next month or so, 2 months, until we actually issue the debt.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll drop it.
There are 4 pieces of equipment that are being financed, and I'll get you and Pete the list.
Okay. Thank you.
So I had one question from the material the school sent us just before the meeting about how they were able to close the gap in their budget. There's a $400,000 item there for special education prepaid credit. Can someone explain that to me?
Where's Ed Vazella when you need him?
I'll ask them then.
No, we can give it to you. I can send you, there's a full write-up on it, but it was a credit back to us, and there was some money that they were able to prepay in fiscal year 20, and they were given the credit in 21. So this meeting their budget is not fiscal year 22, which is what we were just talking about. It's for their current budget that we're in fiscal year 21.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Anything else about budgets then? Town meeting warrant articles, Chris?
I just want to make sure because the Article 7 was sponsored by the warrant committee, the school committee, and the Board of Selectmen. The two other groups have taken their vote within the last 24 hours to remove that article. I'd just like to close the loop and have the Board of Selectmen vote to remove Article 7 from the warrant as well.
Okay, do we have a motion to that effect?
I would move that we remove Article 7 from the warrant.
Second,
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, yes.
And I would like those from the warrant committee who are watching. That's 2 articles in one night I got rid of, just in case we're keeping score. So,
Are there any other, I mean,
I thought
candidates?
I thought Scott was the one that was awarding beers for people who get rid of articles.
Are there other candidates, Christine? I don't know if there's any others that we necessarily can be helpful with, but I mean, I think you forwarded us an email from someone who is concerned about just the logistics of voting at this town meeting. I think we've been concerned about that as well, given that it's going to be different, and for things that don't have to be done this year, if we can avoid doing it, if people either because it's going to be cold or hot or they're not yet comfortable in a crowd, for something that could be decided next year, certainly my preference would be to have something be more normal, because I think even our planned potential 2 special town meetings for next fall are both likely to be indoor in the gym, regular town meetings. I mean, barring, a really horrible change of events. I mean, I think that the 2 specials should be pretty typical, and next year's town meeting should be typical as well. So I don't know if there's others that we can talk about, or I don't think there's others that we ourselves can remove, but.
No, and I think there are a couple that may fall off. We're just waiting to hear about them now. I have a meeting with Scott, town moderator, on Monday, and we will go through that list and determine anything, because we're going to start working on what our groupings would be and how we would structure a 2-night town meeting to make sure that the articles are distributed evenly in terms of interest, so that we get quorum on both nights of town meeting. So I'll go through all of those before my meeting with Scott on Monday and come back on Tuesday with some recommendations if there's anything else we can take off.
Okay. And I have one more question, Pete, if you wouldn't mind, just going back to the nurse and the public board of health coming in next week.
Mhm.
Has that been reviewed by the personnel board?
It has not yet. They're aware of it, but they have not reviewed it fully, but they knew it was being included in the budget. If it's going forward, then the personnel board would have to meet to determine whether or not they would take on another full-time equivalent position.
So are they looking for, who are they looking to go first on? Because I mean, typically with new position, I mean, most of the time with new positions, the personnel board reviews it first, as I'm recalling the process. We haven't added that many positions.
Yeah, correct. After losing 5 last year, I'm out of practice on how we add them back in. So
right.
Let me have a conversation and see if I can get the personnel board to meet on Friday to see the presentation from the Board of Health before you see it on Tuesday. The other alternative is I can invite the personnel board into the meeting as well. So for Tuesday.
Either way is fine with me. I don't want to add to their Zooms if unnecessarily. It's just I would appreciate the input when we're talking about adding a new position. And that, with that position, because we've had this issue in the past with the reporting structure as it relates to Medfield Youth Outreach, is the idea, to whom would that position report? To you, Christine?
The public health nurse would report to me.
Report to you. Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's all I had. Sorry to backtrack.
Not a problem. Action items: vote to approve memorandum of agreement with the Medfield Police League, July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2022. Chris?
Yes, this is our second collective bargaining contract. Let me just put my hands on my notes that I just had in front of me. This is our second collective bargaining contract that we were hoping to get completed before town meeting. And this is a 2-year contract with the police department. Just to highlight, this is keeping in what we had with our prior collective bargaining agreement and what we're going to discuss in a few minutes about non-union. This includes a one-time $1,500 COVID stipend to all police officers, sergeants, and dispatchers as part of our frontline employees when the pandemic first began. This also includes a one-time $1,500 salary compensation in lieu of a cost of living for fiscal year 21. We did not do a cost of living increase for non-union and or management last year, as you know. The contract also addresses a problem we were having, as you're aware, once police chief took over, we had an issue with 5 officers that left the department, whether due to retirement or left for greener pastures or for whatever reason. We were having an issue with officers being here for 4 to 5 years after being in the academy and then moving on to a larger town. And part of that is because in civil service, you have to start in the town that you accept your civil service in. So they have to begin, whether they grew up here or lived here for at least a year. Once you accept civil service, you have to serve in that town. So they had to serve in Medfield, and then they're free to go after that. So we were training them and they were leaving. So what the chief and I worked on with the collective bargaining committee is we've created 2 new steps for our sergeants and our police officers, which gives them motivation to stay for 15 years. And then in addition, a 20-year increase in a step so that we try and get the longevity from those officers and sergeants. This contract also addresses an ongoing issue we had with dispatchers. We lost 3 this year to regional dispatch centers, which were paying a higher salary. We knew last year it was something we'd have to address, and I'm pleased to report that we did come up with an agreement with the dispatchers as well. And I think we'll be able to hold on to the 4 that we have for this coming year, which is great. And then that it also increased, I don't know if you're aware, the Quinn bill, when the Quinn bill went away, we negotiated a separate educational stipend for those officers who were hired after that date. And it's a set flat stipend rather than a percentage of their salary. The differentiation between those on the flat stipend versus our full Quinn bill officers was getting wider and wider. So in order to keep that retention of those younger officers as well, we did bump up by $2,000 the educational incentive for those officers as well. So the whole plan of this MOU and work on the collective bargaining agreement was to work towards retention, particularly where we just put 5 new officers through the academy. This contract definitely focuses on retention.
Just as a part of that as well, we also agreed, because this is a 2-year contract, we're basically a year into it already, that as we look ahead to the next contract, that we try to address it in a more comprehensive way to kind of get our officers sort of to the median of our peer towns where they have been consistently below historically.
Gus, any comments, questions?
No questions.
I'm all set too. Do we have a motion then?
We do. I would move that we vote to approve and authorize us to sign the memorandum of agreement with the Medfield Police League for July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Then we have 2 items related to the Medfield Historical Commission. The first one is to accept the resignation of Tracy Hogan. And she resigned over a matter of principle, I guess, about the Clark Tavern vote. And so do we vote to accept that, Chris, or do we just
No, usually we vote to accept their resignation.
Okay, all right. Do we have a motion to that effect then?
Yes, I would move that we accept with regret the resignation of Tracy Hogan from the Medfield Historical Commission.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, yes.
And secondly, the Medfield Historical Commission has 3 new people that they would like to have elected or appointed. Kirsten Poehler for a term to expire May 19, 2022. Doug Whitla for a 3-year term. Peter Felcher for a 3-year term. Any questions?
My only comment, looking at their backgrounds, they all impressed me with good, solid backgrounds.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I'm grateful that they're stepping forward to do this. It's not there's a lot of work involved. So I would move that we appoint Kirsten Poehler to the Medfield Historical Commission for a term expiring on May 19th, 2022, and Doug Whitla and Peter Fletcher to the Medfield Historical Commission for 3-year terms, presumably expiring in March of 2024. Is that or July of 2024? What's the expiration on?
2024.
March, or what is it?
It's July. Sorry, we usually do it in July. Yep.
So Mr. Whitla and Mr. Fletcher for 3-year terms through July of 2024.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, yes.
Our next action item is to vote to approve a cost of living adjustment for non-union employees per the Personnel Board's recommendation of a 2% COLA. Chris?
So the Personnel Board met several weeks ago and considered the cost of living adjustment. They were very strong last year in voting and accepting a 0% non-union cost of living increase, that they would expect a 2% cost of living this year. We built the budget that way, and they have approved a 2% cost of living for our non-union employees, and that includes merit for our department heads and managerial staff as well. But part of the Personnel Board, part of the bylaw is it requires a vote of the Board of Selectmen and the Personnel Board.
To be clear, Christine, this year means FY22 or
Fiscal year
2021?
22.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. There were no increases for fiscal year 21 other than what I've mentioned in the contracts.
Okay. Okay. No question.
I've got no questions. So do we have a motion?
Yes, I would move that we approve a cost of living adjustment for non-union employees per the Personnel Board's recommendation of 2%, and that cost of living adjustment will be a 2% COLA.
Second.
And our,
Mr. Peterson,
yes,
Mr. Murby,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, yes.
our next action item is to vote to approve the employment contract with the town administrator, Christine Terweiler.
Let's see, what questions could I ask?
I'm not prepared to present this one.
Dean, what do
No
you think of this
questions.
one? So,
It's hard to believe that almost 3 years have gone by. I will tell you that.
and just for a little background for the public, I mean, this is a 3-year contract running through July of 2024. It extends, most of the terms are the same of Ms. Truhau's existing contract. It's kind of in recognition of what the board views as her excellent work, and particularly over the last year under unprecedented and difficult circumstances. The contract from a compensation standpoint, as with the earlier contract, is essentially just a lump sum salary. If you look at salary comparisons and compensation comparisons for town administrators, they have all of these different line items and all of these different reimbursements, all of which are essentially salary, but they get to put them in different bucket and all the rest of it. So the goal of the contract is to bring Christine to the sort of the median of our comparison towns. It includes a potential for a bonus of up to $10,000 per year based on performance. And with that bonus would bring it sort of to the upper third of the comparison towns for town administrators over the 3-year period. So I'd just repeat any other highlights of the contract, which you just mentioned before we
I would just confirm your comment about the being pleased about Christine's performance, actually, since she took over, but certainly in the past year.
Thank you very much.
I would agree with that as well. Yep, absolutely.
So I would move that we approve and authorize ourselves to sign the employment agreement with the town administrator as provided in our meeting packet.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Then the final action item is vote to approve the employment contract with Police Chief Michelle Garrett.
This part of the meeting, I don't think she's still watching, that the chief might actually find this part stimulating. As opposed to she's not watching anymore, so.
So as you know, we had Michelle began with us, police chief began with us in April of 2019. I think it's an understatement to say we're all incredibly pleased with her performance since she began. I think the cost savings on her budget last year and her work during the pandemic was extraordinary. So she actually had 1 year left on her contract, and the Board of Selectmen have met with her and negotiated a 3-year extension. So we will actually remove the final year of that first contract, and this is a new contract extension for 3 years. And this also brings the police chief up to the median of where she needs to be in terms of other towns within our comparable communities as well. And it also does make her eligible for the $1,500 COVID stipend as a frontline employee as well.
Guess I would make two comments. One, I'm definitely pleased with the job that we've seen her do since she came here. Actually, three comments. I look at the unexpected challenges that this town has faced that were heavily dependent upon a strong leader at the police department helping the town navigate certainly COVID, but not only COVID. And I kind of look back and say there was no way we could have even speculated on some of those challenges at the time that we were deciding to hire. And the fact that she's handled those situations, she was just a good person to have in the position of handling that along the way. And the one other comment I'll share in our discussions, whether that was meaningful to me, is it meant a lot to me to hear her tell us that her experience here in this town has been good. Her desire was to stay with this town. Quite aside from negotiating contracts, it's good to know that you have key leaders in town that not only are satisfied with what the contract says, but actually genuinely are here and happy to be here. And that's what I heard in her comments. Personally, I definitely appreciated hearing that as part of our conversation.
Yep. Anything, Mike?
I would echo Gus's comments. I think I'm very grateful that we've successfully negotiated this contract with the chief, and we'll have her for 3 more years. I think I had high expectations, and she's exceeded them in every way. And obviously, it's a challenging job in any circumstance. It's going to be more challenging going forward as the police department navigates the new laws at the state level, and also works to integrate and train close to a third of the department. We've hired a bunch of new people. We are back to full strength. And I think that all of those younger officers will greatly benefit from her leadership and mentorship and guidance as she kind of builds up this department and has us at our full complement of police officers. So we're grateful to have her back on board for the 3 years.
I agree also that we've been very fortunate to have her. And I think that Gus pointed to a very salient point that stuck out for me too, how appreciative she was of to be working for the town, and how much she appreciated Medfield. So that was nice to hear. Do we have a motion then?
We do. I move that we approve and authorize ourselves to sign the employment contract with Police Chief Michelle Garrett included in our agenda packet for today's meeting.
Second.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Murby.
Aye.
And Mr. Marcucci. Aye.
We have nothing on a consent agenda. Town administrator updates. Chris, Nick?
I just have a few, just to let you know, there's more information on the library website, but the library is going to start to do a limited opening on Monday. In addition to coming in to talk about the public health nurse, the Board of Health will be here along with the Council on Aging on next Tuesday to talk about some of our reopening plans for the Council on Aging. And then I also wanted to let you know that John Cogan, who was our veterans agent that left us back in the fall and was not able to return, both Nick and several other staff members, as well as the veterans agent in Norwood, have been filling in for us. We're going to continue our relationship with the town of Walpole and share a joint veterans agent. And we've just completed the hiring process, and Mark Bryson will be the new veterans agent, and he began in Walpole today, and we expect a visit and set him up in his new office in Medfield next week. Once he gets settled in, I'll bring him into a selectmen's meeting and introduce him to you as well.
Okay, great.
That's all I have.
Is that it?
That's all I have this evening.
Okay. It looks like we've got a meeting tomorrow night with the school building committee, and we've got a meeting a week from tonight. Selectmen's reports, Gus?
Just one item, and this is actually to get back to the two of you on the discussion we had during last week's meeting about the letter that went to the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. I just wanted to explain my decision not to add my signature to that letter. And my comments have to do with just why I did what I did. I'm actually I'm not intending to criticize the two of you for having signed it. for what it's worth, I went through, and if any of you are really interested in what I had to say, I think Christine has the marked up version, because I, rather than just saying I wouldn't sign it, I actually sent her the letter that would have had to have been there for me to sign. So unlike you, Mike, that said, well, there's a few changes and there were some other things that I'd make, but I can live with these few. I actually went through the whole thing and changed virtually every paragraph.
No, I saw your markup, Gus.
Oh, you did see it. Okay, so you are, so you've
and
already, you already
I would have,
understood.
my
Okay.
position was I would have signed either version of the letter.
Okay.
So,
So I don't need to drag anybody through. If the two of you saw what it was that I commented on, then I don't need to comment further on the letter. But I did, in fact, decide that I wasn't prepared to sign that, and I had reasons for doing it, and they are documented in that markup.
I saw your comments. I was good with both letters.
Okay.
I would have signed them both. We could have sent two letters.
Okay, good.
I would file a concurring opinion with both of them.
That's my only update. I spent most of
Okay.
last week skiing, so
How was the snow, Gus?
it was three phenomenal days, totally different. One day was single digits, sunny, and nobody was there, and the snow was fast. The second day was 25, ideal midwinter conditions. Again, not too many people there because it was midweek. And then the third day was 50 degrees, but not until later in the day, so it didn't really get heavy. It was just really nice skiing.
Oh,
It was
good.
great. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yep.
Mike, any reports?
I don't think I have a report since we'll be at the meeting tomorrow night with the school building committee. I did want to, I have a question for Gus or a question or request with respect to Memorial Day. And I don't know if the Memorial Day committee has met at all. But
Not to my knowledge.
my suggestion was going to be that maybe you might think about meeting, because I'm hopeful that we might be able to do something for Memorial Day this year. It might have be different, potentially different than what we usually do. I don't know what we allow from the state's perspective, but it would be nice to be able to have a Memorial Day ceremony of some kind. And I've got a potential speaker for you as well if you're looking for that, so we can talk separately.
Okay.
But
Great.
I just wanted to put that on just because it's coming up, and I was thinking about it, and we missed it last year, and it would be nice to do some Memorial Day.
Yep. Thanks
remembrance
for
this year.
that's a good suggestion. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, good idea, Mike. I have nothing to report, so we need a motion to adjourn then.
So I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Murby,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci. Yes.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you all tomorrow night.
See you all tomorrow night.